Okay, well, wonderful to have you here.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much.
So listen, tell me a little bit about where the organization has come since last year. Actually, I saw you guys. I think I probably met you at your booth down in the HUD, last year. And what's new with campus reform since then?
We've absolutely had a lot of growth. I think there's more demand than ever for students on college campuses who are conservative or libertarian, and even just fed up with the bias they see, wanting to have people help them tell their stories. So at Campus Forum, we're trying to help get their message out there, give them a platform to report the facts and hopefully wake some people up. And so our correspondent team has over 100 students around the country now that are writing stories, with more people applying every day. And so I do think there are a lot of students that, as they find out that there's an outlet to help them share their experiences as a conservative in a predominantly liberal area like a college campus, I think we're going to continue to grow. And I think the biggest development we saw this year was really the rise of socialism. We saw it all around the country, whether it was with Ocasio-Cortez, this push for Medicare for all, and all sorts of policies like that. Many of them did start on college campuses, and I think now more than ever, there's a pressure, overwhelming pressure on campus to support these ideas, and you're viewed as not compassionate, you're viewed as not caring about poor people if you dare to push back on these ideas. So I'd say that was the big trend this year, was us seeing how the left has really pushed the idea of socialism on college campuses.
Fascinating. Is this just something that's been here all along and now suddenly it's okay to talk about it, or is it something that's actually fomenting and kind of growing?
I think it's probably a mix of the two. Yeah. There's certainly long been the notion that, well, rich people should take, they're the ones that should have to, pay their fair share and redistribute the wealth. That was something since the Obama era of, distribute the wealth. And so, I think the underlying principles of socialism were already there. I think just recently, though, we've seen the name become more mainstream. And I think Bernie Sanders played a large role in that.
Yep.
Young people, many young Democrats especially, viewed Bernie as standing up to the establishment, and so they liked him against Hillary. And so him saying, I'm running on democratic socialism, there's nothing democratic about it, it's socialism.
Right.
Him running on that, I do think, normalized the term.
Right.
And it led to a lot of other people who already supported the ideas but were afraid to come out and say they like socialism. It empowered them to the point where, well, actually, it's okay for us to admit what we really want. And I do think a lot of young people, though, have a warped perception of what socialism actually is. They think, well, it's just social programs that are going to help poor people, and I think they don't realize that it often disproportionately impacts low-income communities in socialist countries.
I've been kind of feeling like this is one of these attempts to try to push things, further to the left. Basically, and in some cases, it was a election-winning decision, right, for a number of representatives that are in the House right now.
I think that's certainly part of it, and I do think that the left they're okay right now with incremental victories. Take the Green New Deal, for example, this big overarching socialist policy. They probably know it's not going to pass, but when you shoot down the Green New Deal, other things start looking much more reasonable. Carbon tax starts looking much more reasonable. Cap and trade, it starts looking much more saying, well, we don't want the Green New Deal, so okay, we'll settle for that. So I think a lot of times the left starts on the furthest, maybe fringe element of the party to try and use it as a bargaining chip.
Right? Like so mad.
Absolutely. And I think that there is a misconception that certain elements of the party are just a fringe, small portion, because there are certainly ideas that you would think are fringe that are embraced by a large portion of the party. If you take young people that identify as liberal, for the first time in history, the word capitalism is viewed less favorably than socialism for millennials, especially for young Democrats who...
It's like becoming a bad word.
Capitalism is becoming a bad word, and you're viewed as being greedy if you want to be successful. And so rather than teaching people to emulate success, we're teaching them to loathe it and to think that you must have pushed someone else down if you got successful. So I do think it's important that we make sure people know there aren't just 3-5% of people on the left that are embracing socialist policies. The majority of young people on the left view socialism more favorably than capitalism, and that is a enormous shift in the way that our country is moving forward. And I think it's one of the reasons President Trump came out so strong in the State of the Union and said, we are a capitalist nation, we'll always be a free market nation that embraces these things. And I was very encouraged that he did that.
But you're telling me that Campus Reform Leadership Institute, there's growth here, right? So how much growth are we talking about? Is it clearly not enough growth from the sound of it, or?
I think the place I see the most growth is in the number of people that are paying attention to what's going on. So we may not see growth as far as having a 500% increase in students that are sending us tips, but the growth is coming in the number of outlets, the number of people that are calling in and sending tips, and the number of people that are wanting to cover these stories, because I think more and more people are starting to realize what happens on college campuses inevitably is going to evidence itself in culture. And so I think they're realizing we need to start paying attention to what's going on in our university system. So the kind of the stories that we're covering, we've had more traffic to our website, we've had more TV appearances, we've had more interview requests, we've had more,
just a lot more interest.
A lot more
in
interest in what's going on, because again, I think as a society we're starting to realize when you ask the question of how do these policies become normalized, I think poor people are realizing it's starting on campus. Maybe we should go look at what's going on there. Are our campuses too biased? Are our campuses doing a good job of educating rather than indoctrinating? And I think that's why we see so much more interest in our stories now. And I do think that a lot of students, as young people, there's nothing more cool than being countercultural. And when the entire culture is pushing on you to support leftist ideas, I think at a certain point it is countercultural to stand up and be conservative. And so I think that's one reason we see so many young people here at an event like CPAC, because it's almost an empowering thing for them to stand up to the power.
And what's the impact of the administration being the administration it is and implementing the policies that it's implementing on perception of young conservatives, of who they can be publicly in America, I guess?
Well, how long do you have? Because I can talk all about the administrations, and I think that the biggest impact that I see from these policies is that students simply don't know conservative ideas. And so when you don't know something, when it's foreign to you, of course you're going to be innately afraid of it. Suspicious of it. And so people, they don't really know what conservatism is about. And so when conservative ideas do come to campus, many times they're shouted down, many times people disinvite them because they're too scared of those ideas. And the university administrators...
But they don't necessarily know what, they're misinformed, you're suggesting, about what those ideas actually are.
I think they absolutely are.
Yeah.
And so I think part of that comes from the administrators and professors doing a poor job of teaching all sides of the political spectrum and say, here, make your mind up for yourself. They're not doing that right now. And so I think also the lengths to which administrators have gone to stifle conservative ideas and keep liberal ones present is hurting people. I have been on over 100 college campuses in the last 2.5 years, and I've seen this trend where young conservative students are almost always more informed than their young liberal counterparts. I don't mean that's
almost
like
mean. Forced. No, they're forced to be.
They are,
because you gotta you're gonna get called on your stuff, right?
Absolutely. If you are a young conservative, you didn't accidentally become that way. You have to consistently defend your ideas. You're doing your own research because you're not getting it in class. You're not getting it from the mainstream media or on social media many times. If you are a young person that goes to college apathetic and you don't really pay attention to politics, you're going to end up liberal, because there's a social incentive for you to do so. There's there's an educational incentive for you to do so in class. They see what happens to young conservatives in class. They don't want to deal with that.
Right.
So they say, well, I'm liberal, but you often are never challenged. And so as a result, I do think that we're doing a disservice to young liberals in America by not allowing them the chance to intellectually grow in a safe environment like a college campus. And so that's something that should concern people on both sides. We should want young people graduating college with a good sense of what they believe and why they believe it. And that comes with debate and stewarding those conversations on campus. And I think administrators are failing at doing that.
So what the number one thing that you think can be done to basically shift the tide, move things in a forward direction, what do you think that would be?
I would say bring more differing political opinions to campus. And I think the reason we see people falling for these ideas that we know don't work, like socialism, we know this doesn't work, but we see people falling for it, I think, because one, there's no historical context to it. I think people are unaware of what socialism has wrought throughout history. And not just socialism, but issues on all sides. And so I think that the quickest thing we could do to help shift the direction of our country in a positive way is to better educate next generations on history, on simple topics like economics and civics, and educate from all sides. I'm not saying that every person that graduates college has to be conservative, but I would like to see a system, and I think most Americans can agree we should have a system where students go to class, they hear all sides, they hear different opinions, they debate, and they make up their minds for themselves.
And they can understand the genuine arguments
and they can
behind
understand
each side.
what both sides are actually saying, not just, well, here's what the other side's about, and giving some ridiculous, caricature of what the other side is.
So is this, a mass deployment of these sorts of tables that Hayden was at, for example, or?
That's what we're trying to do at the Leadership Institute. Our goal is to help foster conservative activism on college campuses, and so that means helping student groups grow, helping get ideas out there. And so I do think, in my experience on campus, a lot of students will come up to me and they'll say, look, I really want to get involved in this conservative stuff. I agree with you, but I can't do it because I see what happened to other people that do it. So part of what we're trying to do is just normalize those ideas, because the more you see something, the more normal it is, the more comfortable you are to say, you know what, this is right, I do agree with this. So that is a goal, and ultimately I think that all universities benefit when there are more options for students to get involved in political groups, whether it's a libertarian group, conservative group, centrist group, whatever it is. There are plenty of liberal student groups, and oftentimes they get extra funding from universities, they get special benefits that conservative groups don't get. They don't really have to worry about their speakers being disinvited. They don't have to worry about paying extra security fees.
Sometimes exorbitant. Sometimes, there's no speech given because it's, what, $1 million? I can't even remember some of these numbers.
There are ridiculous security fees. I went to Ithaca College recently with Dave Rubin, commentator there, and the two of us were doing an event. Right before the event, the university said, hey, we've had some risks of violence because of your presence on campus. We're going to have to charge, I believe it was $8,000 in security fees. And the university forces the student group that is the victim of these threats of violence to pay that. And that's a problem because essentially you're telling groups that don't want you there, all you have to do is stir up a problem, all you have to do is threaten violence, and the university will put security fees.
Problem solved.
Problem solved. And so rather than punishing the people that are threatening violence, you're punishing the peaceful people that are simply trying to bring ideas. And that is a very common thing. Students have to deal with these controversial speaker clauses, where if you want to bring a speaker to school, the university gets to decide who's too controversial and who's just the right mix of controversy and who's educational. And when you give the power to the university to decide all those things, again, I think by nature, ideas that aren't present are going to be deemed controversial, and so it's conservative ones that end up being left out.
So interesting, these security fees, it just struck me. They're like another version of heckler's veto, basically.
That's exactly what they are, and when people realize, again, that they can stand up and shout down people and keep an event from happening, you incentivize more people to do that, and when they see these ridiculous security fees, you do incentivize violence, or at least a threat of violence, because universities know, well, we don't want to have these speakers here if they're going to cause a stir, rather than telling students, you're going to be adults and if you don't want to come to the event, don't come to the event. If you want to come and have a debate, come and have a debate, but we're not going to shut this event down simply because you don't want these ideas here.
What a wonderful place to end our conversation. First Amendment, it's the First Amendment for a reason, right?
Absolutely.
Cabot, such a pleasure to have you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.